Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Perris Union High School District Special Board Meeting of September 16th, 2020. The board will be respecting recent orders from the Governor of California, the Health Officer of the County of Riverside, and guidelines for the Center of Disease Control related to the maintaining public health and safety at this time. Consistent with these orders and guidelines, this meeting will be held online only, and there will be no physical meeting location open to the public. The board encourages members of the public to join the meeting electronically. At this time, I will call the meeting to order at 2:02 p.m. I'll be asking for a roll call to determine a quorum. So we'll do that roll call. Trustee Arau.
Here.
Trustee Garcia.
Here.
Trustee Freeman.
Here.
Trustee Nellison.
Here.
And myself, Trustee Stafford, here. We have established a quorum. All items requiring a vote will be an oral vote for this meeting, followed up with an electronic vote. So we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. Do we do an electronic vote on this one, Anna?
No.
No, okay. So let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, item 3.1. And ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So we'll move to item 4.1, invitation to address the Board of Trustees on non-agendized items. Do we have any takers?
We did not have any submitted this evening, Mr. Stafford.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go to our study session, item 5.1, study session. The Board of Trustees will conduct a study session on parliamentary procedures. And from there, I'll hand the meeting over for our training to Mr. Bennett and our guest.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Stafford. The board had requested that we do some work on governance training and looking at Robert's Rules of Order and Parliamentary Procedures following our last board meeting. So we originally talked about wanting to have CSBA come in and do that. And I tried to contact them 3 times and they never got back to me. So we wanted to still do the training. So we asked Terrellyn Finders and Chris Peeler to come in. Terrellyn, let her explain her background when she gets a chance, and they're going to work with us this evening to work through that. I did forward out we sent the Robert's Rules of Order books out and the CDs out, and this morning I sent out another copy of the governance handbook just so we had that available to us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Terrellyn and Chris.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. It's nice to be with you. Thank you for your time. And thank you, Superintendent Bennett, for publicly acknowledging that I'm an understudy to CSBA. Okay, there's no accounting for humor in a virtual meeting, so I'm just going to take those smiles as you're with me. I'm just teasing you there, Grant. So it is a pleasure to be with you. And I too am a trustee, a former trustee. I served on the Board of Education 3 terms in the Southern California District. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself after introductions from the board. And if you'll, staff will please excuse me, I'm going to stick to introductions just to the board so that we optimize time for the board discussion here today. If you please, if we could start with board president, sir, and then maybe if you would call your colleagues by name just to keep the meeting orderly. And I'd just love to hear, please, how long you've been on the board, and if there's anything in particular that you feel you want to discuss today or a desired outcome you have for our discussion today. Our time is quite limited, but I do want to make sure that this meeting works for you, the board members. So I'll start with you, President Stafford.
Okay, thank you. I'm President Stafford, the trustee for Area 2. I've been on the board. This is my fourth year. Um, I have a couple of questions about procedures. I want to make sure we're following the right procedures. We need access to that information in real time, so are not making incorrect statements or going out of policy. So with that, I'll introduce Trustee Arau,
Thank you.
and maybe he wants to introduce himself.
Thank
Thank
you, President. Good afternoon. My name is Jose Arauz, and I have been on the board. This is my year number 6 on the board. I'm on the second term. I'm looking forward to learning about the procedures, the general procedures of the Robert Rules of Order, specifically related to the element that triggered this study session. There is a specific question that I think I already have the answer, but I just want to confirm and to see if we're on the same page, right? Based on that. And the question is, when you are going to make a motion to amend, does that motion has to be made by the board member who made the original motion, or any other board member can make it?
Okay.
That's a specific question. And overall, the general process for Robert Rules of Orders, so we can conduct our meetings according to that.
Okay. Very, very good. Thank you. We will. And when we get to that section, if we do not address your direct question, please make sure we do, because this is your meeting. This meeting needs to work for the board members. And so
Okay.
thank you very much.
Next up, we have Trustee Freeman, Dr. Freeman. You're muted.
Hey, yeah, thank you. Yeah, my name is Dr. Freeman, Randy Freeman. I'm a retired kindergarten teacher from Val Verde. This is my second year on the Perris High School Board after spending 10 years on the Menifee Union School Board. I agree with Dr. Rao. That's, I think, a big question about the amendments to the motion. And then there's another one, as when there are presentations being made and comments, it's very specific as far as public comments are concerned. We have presentations by different persons that we do interact with them having questions, and that's part of the presentation. Then we get to the trustees' comments, and sometimes they seem to end up being a question and answer session, and I was wondering what would be appropriate for that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And thank you for being a kindergarten teacher. Yay. Yay. That's a special brand of energy.
Yeah, well, they're better than teenagers.
Well, no comment.
Next up, we'll have Trustee Garcia.
Hi, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. My name is Edward Garcia. I am a former president of CSEA. I did that for 2 years. I am currently the vice president of CSEA, and I believe this is my 4th year as vice president. And this is also my 4th year as board member for Trustee Area 4. I don't really have any questions. I believe I'm very familiar with Robert's Rules of Order due to the union. We have to do this continuously on a monthly basis, but I'm open to any training and suggestions that you guys have to offer.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Okay, next up, we'll have Trustee Nellison.
Hello, my name is David Nellison. I'm a teacher in a different district, and I've been on this board for 8 years. And I also am curious about the wording that Dr. Rao brought up about amendments amendments to motions. So that would be my interest in this as well.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, that's it.
I think that's it. Okay. Well, it's very nice to meet you. I'll spend very, very little time on my background. I know you know Chris Keeler. He's attorney with the firm, and my boss. So uproarious laughter and applause, loose change, all greatly welcome. My evaluation's in about 2 weeks, so there you go. I am a former trustee. I was elected 3 terms in the Las Virgenes district. That's in upper pocket of LA County, right up there up against Ventura County. District that is bifurcated by the county line. So that made it kind of interesting. Serves 4 cities, the cities of Calabasas, yes, our claim to fame, the Kardashians, Hidden Hills, Agora Hills, and Westlake Village. So 4 mayors, 4 city councils, a couple water districts, 2 different counties, many challenges that came from that. I learned quite a bit serving on the board. And one of the things that I draw from when I have the privilege of facilitating these governance discussions is that no PowerPoint. You have limited time, and I'm not here to lecture you. This is your meeting. I'm going to guide you through questions. We hear very clearly what you want to accomplish, and I'm just going to open it up. We want to make this work for the board. First, if you don't mind, would you prefer, because I don't want to make a misstep, that I address you by your last name, first name? If I slip and use a first name, is that offensive to anyone? Just a couple rules of the road here.
Just call me Randy.
Jose.
Tony.
Tony, all right.
And I'm
David.
sorry, I didn't introduce our other, well, Mr. Bennett, you know, but Candace Rains, I can see on my screen.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
Christopher Keeler is here also. I'm sorry I didn't introduce them, but I don't know. There's other people in the meeting. It looks like Joe Williams and some more. So sorry about that.
Thank
Mr.
you. It's very,
Mr. Scorpanish.
Yeah, go ahead, Jose.
Oh, I just was telling you that Mr. Scorpanish also is here.
Oh,
I see him.
Mr. Scorpanich, yeah. I don't see everyone. So we'll go from there.
I don't either. I see the board though, but as we move through this, just one other point of sort of housekeeping so we can get rolling. If you just raise your hand, that would be the easiest way for me to call on you, just so we can all get in versus a chat. So just to go ahead and raise your hand or something in our general direction, and we're just going to proceed. If you will dive right in. So I'm not an attorney. However, I work with about 100 attorneys, so I'm obligated in every meeting to say 3 times because lawyers like things in triplicate that I'm not an attorney. So that's 2. Listen for the next one because there's a prize. Anyone who hears the third, and Candace, you don't get the prize because so it's got to be a board member. What I wanted to do before we move right into parliamentary procedure is just use this opportunity. Boards, we know it is a very difficult task to be on a board of education. The public doesn't necessarily always understand our role, and our role is very important. You bring the public voice to the discussion, helping to make the schools responsive and reflective of your community. You also set the policy. You're very clear on your job. But you do have, I have to say, one of the more impressive governance team handbooks I've seen, in that it's very well organized. I think it would be clear to anyone who doesn't even understand the role of the board, what you do and how you do it. I applaud you for taking time to put it together. It's actually a very, very nice handbook. I applaud you for it. I wanted to give you a little bit of time as we move into parliamentary procedure, and Chris Keeler will walk you through all of that detail and take every single question and then some. But I just want to remind you that your handbook says at the top, at the beginning of your agreed to protocols, that you believe a well-run, efficient meetings model leadership, promote trust and confidence, and provide opportunities to demonstrate strategically moving the district forward and planning. That is well articulated in your handbook. And so to that point, I applaud Superintendent Bennett and this board, President Stafford, for carving out time so you can talk about parts of our meetings that can get a little clunky or sticky, or they don't feel as efficient as possible, and we want to tidy that up. So that's what we're going to do here today. Before we move into bylaws, though, I wanted to ask a couple of questions in the context of your handbook, because these are in the days of remote meetings. Some of these items are a little sticky or maybe clunky in other districts. So I want to give you a chance to talk about them if there's anything we want to adjust in these particular areas. And I'll just begin with a set of questions. And if there's no issue, we'll just move right past it, not looking to invent a problem where there isn't one. I address myself to the board as a whole, is the process for setting the agenda, getting an item on the agenda, and how the agenda is set in working with the superintendent clear to the board, and is it working for you?
I'm good. It works for me. I go over the agenda with Mr. Bennett, usually a week prior to the publishing of the agenda. And we thoroughly go through it. Gives me time to read it during the week and ask questions. And I assume, I don't know what the meeting schedule of each member is and if they are meeting with Mr. Bennett, so I do not know that. And we encourage that, but you know, each member has a different schedule, different career, so it's not always possible. So
Very good.
okay.
Thank you.
Anybody want to comment on? Remember, we just raised the hands.
No.
Okay.
It's all good. Okay. I don't see any hands. Okay. The reason I ask is that as we're working remotely and there's so much more email exchange and social media discussion, the process for setting the agenda has gotten a little cloudy in some districts, and sometimes we don't have the time that you have right now today carved out to just talk about our operations together. And just want a quick reminder not to admonish anybody, because I really don't know whether or not this applies to anybody here, but you need to do your homework. You need to read the agenda and read the items before you come into meetings. Is there clarity on, and I address myself first to the superintendent, is there clarity on where board members should be taking their questions in advance of your meetings, and is that working for everybody? Are your meetings full of unanticipated surprise, or I should say surprises or unanticipated issues that we should be working out while you have some time today?
I think it's going fairly well with that. Most of the questions go to Tony first, and then it would come to me. If it's just some innocuous type questions that aren't dealing with governance and meetings, they go directly to me, and I'll get back with them, or I'll put them in touch with the assistant super executive director that could help them through those issues.
Okay. Yes, sir. You're mute.
Sorry, I have a question in terms of the process, right? Usually, there's not a formal process to add items on the agenda. Sometimes we call Tony or we tell Mr. Bennett. Is there kind of a time frame in order for us, okay, the agenda is going to be developed by this day. Any items that you would like to be included and be considered, they need to be, we need to receive it by this date. And the second question is, how do we determine if those items are valid items that should be on the agenda? Is that an agreement of Mr. Bennett and Tony in this case as the president? Or what is the expectation in terms of items on the agenda and deciding what items are going to be there?
Okay.
So I can jump on and answer that one if that's okay. So your board bylaws address this exact issue, and I don't actually have them in front of me, but I can look that up. They normally address the timing, and 2 weeks prior to a meeting is a very common timeline under the CSBA model. So let's say a board member wants an item to go on the agenda. Most board bylaws say go to the board president. Some say go to the superintendent. So we'll have to clarify that. But most have a 2-week timeline, and then the superintendent and the board president determine the threshold question is whether it fits within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. The next question is, where should it fall on the agenda? Is this an action item? Is this a discussion item? And the third issue is timing wise. Do you need a report from staff? Normally it's going to go on the next agenda. That's why you get the 2 weeks of lead time. But in some instances where there's going to require some lead time to prepare for it, normally if the superintendent and board president is going to take a little more time, they'll come back to you, confirm the timing, and usually hopefully reach agreement that no, it won't be this meeting because we have to do some homework. It will come on the next meeting. But that's the usual process, and it's laid out in the board policy, board bylaws, normally like 93, I think it is. But I can pull that up and confirm, but that's the usual CSBA model.
Yes.
And in addition to that, sir, I just wanted to suggest that, and I appreciate your raising the question. So specificity from Chris in terms of timing, but to your question about where does it go on the agenda, sometimes the superintendent will say, let me get you some information on this first before we would decide. Maybe the board needs a lot of information on a particular topic. A district up here is studying substitute teachers right now, and somebody had asked for an agenda item, and we rolled it back and realized we really need to get them a lot of information before we'd even consider an agenda item. So your superintendent's going to make a judgment call with the board president. Do I get them information? Where does it belong on the agenda? If it belongs on the agenda, they may get back to you, Jose, and say that, you know, we're giving you a full report on, let's just say it's nutrition related in March, and can you hold it for that? And you'd probably say, sure, that's fine. So there's a rhythm there of consult with your superintendent and board. Is everyone comfortable with that? Is that working for everyone? Not?
Yeah,
Okay.
we can just start implementing that. They have a 2 weeks time frame, and probably we can send a reminder. This is the 2 weeks. If you have any questions or any items on the agenda, you can send it to us. I just was wondering about the time frame and who decides what is going to be there. But usually we are pretty good. I can talk to Mr. Stafford or sometimes with Mr. Bennett, and they include it. But I was wondering about the formal expectations on that. Thank you.
So let me add one thing to this, because I did pull up your board bylaw. It's bylaw 9322. It actually has the 1 week time frame, which is very, very hard to do for a school district. I recommend a 2 week lead time. You currently have one. I'd recommend that you amend that to make it 2, because 1 week is so little time prior to a meeting, especially, I mean, that's usually your agenda deadline at that point. So anyway, it's board bylaw 9322, and it's about halfway.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it is a very tight timeline. So when would you suggest we amend that, and how would you recommend us to go proceed with that?
So normally you do a couple of readings of your amended policies and bylaws, and you can do that at any time. You just put it on the agenda as a discussion item, as a first reading, and you just make an amendment. You change 1 week to 2 weeks, and then the second time it comes through, you can adopt it, or second reading and adopt it at the next meeting. So it takes a while because of your multiple readings. That's just the normal process.
Right.
But it would be a very simple amendment, just to change the number of days.
So normally, I guess we don't have like a good of the order scheduled in the agenda, but we have the opportunity to speak. And would that be the time? Would that be the appropriate time? Because you're saying put it on the agenda. Would that be considered an action item? Would that be considered something just a talking point?
If this is something that you want to pursue, the superintendent and the board president can talk together and put it on the agenda with an amendment and have it come to the board with the first reading. And so they can just make it happen if they want to pursue that.
Thank you.
I have a question. I have a question. Am I not muted? Am I good?
Good.
Okay. Take this meeting today. We've got a stack of bylaws, like a little mini phone book here. And I've gone through these and I have questions on a lot of these. Now, if I were to sit here and go through each one, I've tried to research it myself, but some I still question. It takes a lot of time. And to do that in a regular meeting or a closed session, or when could we review this? Well, that 2 week time would probably improve, but we're automatically putting these bylaws, we're approving them, and I don't know that they're actually being read, or who knows what's where. So, and sometimes I get confused, and I have questions, and I think it's come up before that we found some things that we didn't necessarily agree with. These are recommendations by CSBA, and they do have to be read. And a lot of the questions I have, even on this doc, is what it talks about: the public's rights, but not the board's rights. You know, so I get a little confused with that. How can we improve that process?
Well, there are a number of things you can pursue. It's really all the privilege of the board. It isn't uncommon, although I think staff might not take too kindly to this comment. And I know you're all busy, but it isn't uncommon for a board to calendar many study sessions so they can really move through all of the policy. I know when I first joined the board in Las Virgenes, I remember kind of cheekily saying in one of our study sessions, I hope I'm reelected so I can see this project through to fruition, because it took us a long time to get through all the policies. But the practical reality is that that's your job. You know, that's our job. It's the law of the land, and we need to read it and be comfortable with it. So that may be a discussion you want to have right now, or maybe even just your board president to your superintendent talking about, have we provided adequate time for all of the board members to read through these policies, discuss them, and give you direction?
Dr. Rao?
Yeah, I just want to add what you said, that the objective would be not only to read them, but to understand the implications of the change. Because sometimes we might just read it to the letter, but what we have? How is this going to change what we are doing? So we really need to have that understanding. And I agree with you that might imply more time to to discuss this between ourselves, with the support of Mr. Bennett, of the superintendent cabinet, to really have an understanding of what we are voting, what we are approving.
With the CD-ROM that Mr. Bennett gave us, and of course the book, is there some way we could have a computer designated right there at the meeting to look something up real quick and be able to verify, so we know, okay, we can move on this. You know, we know that we're not violating policy, we're going by policy. It's sometimes it doesn't take a long path of research. It could be answered immediately, and hopefully we'll get better even after this. But would that be something feasible?
If you want it, I'll put it there.
Okay, I mean, well, somebody has to operate it. So, hey, Joe. So, I don't know. That's just an idea. You know, if we had a question and we're going back and forth, and we say, okay, what is the rule? And had somebody, well, let's look that up real quick and find out. That might, you know, make things quicker.
It certainly would be in line with your language about a well-run, efficient meeting. And that might be something you want to look at, Superintendent Bennett, about how you can. Sometimes the policy questions come up for board, and if you can grab it right away, answer it right away, we can move along. And sometimes we'll say, maybe we need to table this one because we have several questions. But what we don't want to do as board is hold up staff's important work. But we also want to understand the decisions we're making and the implications of the decisions we're making. And that's a rhythm, that's a dance between board and staff. Did you have a thought on that, Chris? Do you have, from all your experience? Oh, I beg your pardon. I saw your hand up there, sir.
Trustee Garcia.
So we don't have a parliamentarian. How would we designate one, and who would that be? I think that's more a session because we want that.
Yeah, and that's a good question. It's pretty common for districts to have one cabinet member who's just knows it's their job to wear the striped shirt and be the referee when it comes to parliamentary questions. That happens in many districts. I learned Robert's rules because I was at a board meeting that had really contentious issues come up, and I was there for a charter school issue. I just happened to be there, and I ended up answering a question about Robert's rules. And the next 2 years, I went to every one of their board meetings, and that was a really expensive way for them to have good advice regarding Robert's rules. It's far more cost effective to have someone who's already going to be there, who gets a little training. You may already have someone who's expert in parliamentary procedure, but you may also just want a little refresher, and hopefully have someone who can guide you on those questions, which with a quick cite to the actual rule. And there are a lot of materials out there, and in fact, I've provided a cheat sheet that has most of the motions and how they rank, which will be, I think, helpful for this group. But it is really common to have a parliamentarian, not an official, someone you hire just for that gig, but someone who you trust, who's done their homework and can chime in and help out during the meetings.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That could be a good follow-up from today's discussion. Absolutely. That's certainly what we did, Chris. We just relied on staff, and it worked very well. And I see it in many other districts as well. At this point, I want to, I heard a voice, but I want to move into specifically parliamentary procedure. And there were specific questions about literally calling an item open. If it's amended, how do you proceed from there? And so maybe, Chris, you want to walk us through the steps for that, which are outlined in their handbook, but they did not address some of the questions that they have. Specifically, I point to page 8 of your handbook, managing action items. The board president introduces the action item, staff presents, board members have clarifying questions, and then we get into this whole notion of a motion, a second, if it's amended, and so forth, and everything there. So maybe you want to walk them through that, please?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. And I'm getting a bit of an echo, so if you're not speaking, maybe if you mute, because I hear my voice coming back through someone's speakers. Oh, that's perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. Boy, I'll tell you, we've learned a lot about Zoom meetings and virtual meetings in the last few months. So exactly right, the way Terralyn kind of set the stage, and you've done this a gazillion times, where we now come to agenda item K1, which is approve modification of facilities at X school site, whatever it is. You introduce the topic, staff will make a presentation, explain what it is that you're being asked to do, and then the board president will often say, is there a motion? And one of the board members will say, I move that we, fill in the blank. Is there a second? You have someone make a second. And then that opens the door for debate, right? Normally you don't have debate before you have a motion and a second, because there's not an actual question on the floor. So now there's a question on the floor. And so you have your discussion, and you often will have a very good discussion, and people might think, well, maybe I now do not agree completely with this motion, how this motion has been phrased. And so they can make a motion to amend. And a motion to amend can be kind of one of the most confusing of motions, because you get discussion on this motion to amend, and then people often think the vote on a motion to amend is a vote on the ultimate motion, when all the motion to amend is, should we change the question? And you take your vote on whether you should change the question. If you vote in favor of the motion to amend, it means that is the new question. And then you debate that new question. And you go through the debate on that, and then you take your vote. And, you know, so often people lose track, and it's so common. It's not just you, it happens everywhere. So I have seen so many times people ask the question, what are we voting on? You know, if I vote yes, what does that mean? Am I voting for the ultimate question or just voting to change the question, right? I mean, even my description of this is confusing. I apologize, but it's just remember the motion to amend is whether you're changing the question, you take your vote on that, you now have a new question, you debate that new question, you take action on that new question. Yes.
So one of the issues that we came across was who can make that amendment. And I was challenged on that because I believe anyone can make an amendment. And I think we need to get clarity on that point as well, because someone said, I don't want to be offensive because we're a team, but someone said only the person who agreed to make the motion can make an amendment. And I don't believe that's correct unless we all agree to make that a standing rule.
So my advice is to allow any member of the board to move to amend, to make a motion to amend, regardless of whether you made the motion or you seconded it. I believe any of the 5 board members can make a motion to amend. You're not supposed to vote against your own motion, or excuse me, I take that back. That's not true. You're not supposed to argue against your own motion, but I believe you can amend your own motion. But you're, so yes, I mean, that's, and the reason behind that is you make a motion, you get a second, you now start discussing it. During that process of discussing the motion, the person who made the motion might get more information and think, hey, I better change course, or I better revise this a little bit. I need to tweak this a little bit. So you may come to the realization that your motion is not exactly what you want now. And so it makes sense that you should be able to make a motion to amend rather than argue against your own motion at this point, because you're not supposed to argue against your motion. So you should be able to amend your own motion, and have a good discussion and change your mind if you learn something during the process. One point I want to make: Robert's Rules is wacky. I mean, it really is, and it was created for large deliberative assemblies. There are groups like there are these congresses of churches, so you go to a big giant meeting and it's 300 representatives of 300 congregations across the US, and they're a decision-making body. Robert's Rules is meant to control massive decision-making groups. It was not intended for a 5-member board. And so, Trustee Garcia made a reference to, hey, maybe we could decide how to do things on our own. You can. If you come up with something from Robert's Rules that doesn't work for you, you can adopt a bylaw for how to do something differently than Robert's Rules, because not everything fits perfectly. Dr. Arawis, I see your hand. You're still muted.
Thank you, Chris. I just wanted to say that your suggestion is according to the Robert Rules of Order. If everybody has this book, you look at page 120, 12.5. It says, neither the member who offers an amendment nor the maker of the main motion amends or make the amendments. That means, as a corollary, as a consequence of this, if we work backwards, it is allowed any other member, because it says neither the member who offers the amendment, the ones who make the motion, nor the maker of the main one. That means that it is allowed, and it is on the Robert Rules of Order, the suggestion that you are mentioning. I just wanted to mention that is supported by page 21, 12.5.
I think also I just want to offer this suggestion, and I address myself to the superintendent and Candace, who is the one who contacted me. This is where staff can be very helpful because it's hard sometimes, and maybe it's not for the trustees who are in this meeting, but I would say for myself with humility, sometimes it was hard to be in the meeting and run the meeting, to really dive into the meeting, be in it and manage it. And things, if you're really listening to one another, you do change your mind. So there's emotion and there's discussion like, wow, that is a really good point. And things kind of move around. So to turn to staff and say, please remind us what question is before the board. Is that the question we want to keep before the board? And to just be comfortable with each other. I'm so glad you're having this conversation because part of what you want to do is make sure you're running your meetings as efficiently as possible, not spending 35 minutes talking about parliamentary procedure. Although if you're confused, we need to clear it up. But, you know, I'll remind you of what you already know. Only the board has authority. Individual board members do not have authority, only the board as a whole. And you're only a board when you're in a meeting. So you guys, man, we got to make our meetings work for us and for the kids and for the staff. So I think it's clear here from Chris's contribution and thank you, sir. Again, you know, the boss. But Chris is saying anybody can amend it. I think the key here is for us, and maybe I'm just harkening back to my own experiences, feel to remind us what question is before the board. And are we all focused on that at the same time? Because sometimes we kind of lose track, especially if the conversation's unfolding. Chris, could you summarize from this what and I want more discussion from every board member if you feel that this doesn't answer your questions, but before we go there, could you summarize of what they've discussed and concluded and where they're at so we can have additional board members weigh in on the points that have been clarified here and made by you? You open a motion, there's this
open a motion, there's a motion, there's a second, that opens up debate. Once debate has started, there's a whole list of subsidiary motions that can be raised. You know, some take precedence over others, but you know, some of the most common are a motion to amend. Another might be a motion to postpone consideration of the matter or to lay it on the table. Those are common motions as well. And my advice is that any member can make a subsidiary motion once debate has started. You resolve the subsidiary motion, and whatever comes out of that subsidiary motion, that affects the question. And so the board president should redefine the question every time a subsidiary motion has been passed. So you pass a subsidiary motion, for example, like a motion to amend. At that point, the board president should restate the question and say, you know, the motion to amend has passed. The question that is now before us is, and then you define the question so that everyone knows what we're talking about, and then you move into debate of that. And so the board president role, I was just going to say, is extraordinarily important because he's going to be saying what's happening. You know, he's the one who's making determinations about the effect of the vote and setting the stage for the board's participation. And I've seen plenty of times with board presidents who've leaned over to superintendents and said, so where are we now? And the superintendent says, this is where we are. And you know, we get a little check there. And I see Mr. Nellison, so I'll
I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you when you were in your groove right there, but you had talked about board creating bylaws to determine different types of rules like this. Is there anything in our bylaws that has been laid down even before I was a board member that limits who can make them an amendment on a motion? Is there anything in our bylaws that you noticed at all?
I did not.
I did not either. I don't see any procedural limitations in your bylaws. It's mostly a restatement of essentially the Brown Act and some basic procedures, but the parliamentary procedures are not addressed.
Okay.
You might have a reference to generally following Robert's rules. Let me see. That would be 9323, I believe.
Yes, sir, you have a question.
Dr. Rao had a question.
Yes, I just want to confirm with Chris. That means that at any given time, the board can supersede the Robert Rules of Order based on the question from Mr. Nellison on the hypothetical situation that the previous board might have changed what the Robert Rules of Order say?
So Robert's Rules of Order is a really good way, it's a good guide of how to effectively and efficiently conduct a meeting. It is not the law. But in the absence of a specific bylaw or rule adopted by the local agency, generally speaking, it's expected that you follow Robert's rules. That's just history and tradition of a reasonable way to run a meeting. But if you wanted to depart from a rule in Robert's rules, you could put it specifically in your bylaw. And I've seen that done a couple of times by a couple districts. Most of the time when we learn Robert's rules and we all get good at Robert's rules, we don't need our own bunch of special rules. But in a couple of instances, for example, I've seen well, anyway, there may be particular needs with a particular body, but generally there's not, and I don't think your bylaws lay it out.
David, you have a question?
Tony, I know you wanted to speak, but I just have one really quick rider to that one. I think Dr. Arau was asking, can we bypass the rules? I don't know if he was intentionally meaning at that time, or if we would have to make a new bylaw and then follow it from then on. If we don't agree with something right at that moment, we still are kind of bound by Robert's rules, correct? Until we've created a bylaw?
Actually, I was asking about previews, but that brings a second question. I think it's great, the second question, David.
Okay, so I would generally recommend against suspending normal practices in the moment, because you could just nullify every rule by doing that. So that I would be concerned about that. I think if you identify some procedural issues that you think you should change, you should address those as a board and adopt them into your bylaws, but you shouldn't have a practice of suspending the rules in the moment, or if you have 3 board members who want to, or that just creates a lot of uncertainty about how about what your process will be. So that's a great question. I do advise against it. Make your changes in your bylaws is my best advice.
I had one question. Oh, I'm sorry,
No,
Dr.
go
Rao.
ahead, Tim. No, go
This
ahead.
is
You first.
just a short one. Just so we're the basics. The person that has the motion, made the motion, and even though it's second, cannot control and force a vote, right?
So under Robert's rules, the way, if there is a motion and a second, there's going to be a vote. And the
Okay.
way Robert's rules goes is each board member has a right to speak to it. Now, you can choose not to speak to it, but every member has a right to speak to it, and no member has a right to speak to it a second time until every member has been given their opportunity to speak to it. Once every member has had an opportunity to speak to it, then it would be appropriate for a member to call for the vote, and that's a motion. And so if people aren't, I mean, the way it normally happens is there's a natural end to debate. I mean, you, the board president, have led a discussion. Everyone said everything they need. You will say, Mr. Stafford, hearing no other comments, let's vote. I mean, that's how it usually happens, right? In some instances, debate will go on for a really long time, and it will seem like people are just not going to agree. and someone will call for the question, and they'll make a motion for a vote, and you vote on that motion, you know, unless you as the board president call for the vote. I mean, you have a right to call for the vote, but the person who made the motion or any other member during debate can call for the question, and then you can have a vote on that, and then and if it passes, then you've cut off debate and it's time to vote.
Right.
Okay.
And that is, it's important to remember that, and you probably already know this, have lived this, but it is important and sometimes uncomfortable for the president to say there's been robust debate. And this happened to me as a trustee. Ms. Finders, Trustee Finders, we heard from you. We heard from you again. You have advocated very aggressively for your point of view. You do not have a majority. We're moving on. And, you know, I did have a strong point of view on a particular topic. I could not persuade my colleagues at the dais, which was the legitimate place to be trying to persuade them through my point of view and my information. But the president, one Judy Jordan, who turned to me and said, we're moving on. And that's where we have to be, you know, good colleagues to one another and understand this process. And at the end of the day, somebody can come up to you and say, I thought you were going to vote for X, Y, and Z and help us with school uniforms or whatever, you know, more fiber in the muffins or whatever the topic is. And you can say as a board member, I did advocate very aggressively for that point of view. And this is where I say it's our job to defend the process, to defend democracy. And I say even the court of, you know, the Supreme Court publishes the dissenting opinion, right? You can say, but the board heard me. It was a respectful conversation. They made a decision, and we're going to be moving forward with that decision. That's where you just sort of respect the process. You know, and unlike our legislature and our Senate, no name calling, please. But anyway, that is the rhythm. Chris, I know there are additional questions here, but I'd like you to clarify this because I'm not sure it was completely clear to the group. Something's being discussed, right? And through the process, somebody says, I'd like to amend the question. Do they have to have a majority of people agree to that amendment? Yes, I see a nod.
So they have to have a majority agree to amend the question.
Correct.
And once a majority agree to amend the question, there's a new question. You know, the amended question is on the floor. If the motion to amend fails, the original question is still on the floor.
Okay. Yes, sir. Oh, I beg your pardon. Tell me, I'm sorry. Sorry, demerits, my demerits, President Dr.
Dr. Rao.
Okay. Thank you, Tony. My question is, during the last board meeting, there was a goodwill and we having an intentional misunderstanding. So we proceeded to vote on a motion without making the amendment, right? Because once again, things happen. It was completely unintentional. Before getting this book today, I got it today. So I did some research also, and we can make a motion to amend, and I want to confirm this with both of you, Chris and you. You can make a motion to amend a previous action item from the last board meeting, even in a regular board meeting, right? That is part of what I read. In this specific case, obviously we are not looking into amending everything that we did last time. But in this particular case, since we move forward to approve an action item with the corresponding amendment that there was not the opportunity to present it and discuss it, can we go back and just that specific action item be, I don't know how we can handle this because it was voted without that intention. How is that handled? Oh, is done. We already voted and so be it.
So I would have to look that one up. I haven't seen a motion to amend happen after the fact. And it's especially problematic if some action has been taken to carry out the action that had been approved. so a motion to rescind, for example, is supposed to happen during the same meeting, and many districts follow a pattern. I mean, Robert's rule says it has to happen during a same meeting or during the same session of meetings during a multi-day session of a deliberative body, and that's what the rule says. Many school districts read that to mean, okay, this meeting and the next meeting. Okay, and they haven't changed their bylaws, but that's their practice, but again, it's very problematic if action's been taken, or if something has been approved at a board meeting and then some action in furtherance of that. For example, you approve a contract and you misunderstand a term of the agreement, and then you want to come back and say, well, we didn't quite understand that, let's change that. Oops, if it's been signed and sent to the other side, it's going to be really hard to undo that. So I can give you an answer on the motion to amend at the next meeting. I can look that up and give you an answer on that. But the advice I want to give you is best practice. Let's make sure that we're doing such a good job of running this meeting and understanding what we're voting on, so that we're never in a position where after the vote's taken, we figure out, I wonder if that vote meant what I thought it meant, or whatever, because I know that happens, but paying very close attention to the subject matter and also the procedure can help avoid ever needing to rescind or ever needing to amend later on.
Chris, I would like to make sure we hear from Trustee Freeman as well. And we haven't yet heard, and he did have specific questions as we went into this topic. And so, Sarah, I will respectfully to the president, I ask if we could hear from your colleague, Trustee Freeman. Thank you.
Yes, certainly.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Freeman.
Thank you. What I've been hearing does seem to specifically address the questions that everyone had in mind. It had apparently the rules or Robert's Rules of Order says something, and it can be changed, but not at the same meeting as which the question may have been brought up, right? The other thing about it is I've kind of wondered why we would want to necessarily amend the meeting or move, a motion. If you have a deadline for taking action, like on a budget, then an amendment, if they start amending the motion that has to do with the passage of that budget with a deadline, it could cause us to end up missing the deadline. And I just was wondering how you would deal with that.
Yeah, the procedural rules are meant to help you have a more efficient and orderly meeting. But they should never get in the way of you fulfilling your legal obligations. And if you need to approve a deadline by a certain, or approve a budget by a certain deadline, for example, you need to approve that budget by a particular deadline. So, I think it's a good point that you don't want to get so, caught up in, I mean, you want your action to be right. You do. And you need to make sure that you as a board or a policymaking body, you also have some very specific legal obligations to take certain actions, and you always have to make those decisions. And procedure should help facilitate those important decisions. And hopefully it doesn't get in the way and get confusing and make it harder. I mean, I don't know if I answered your question.
I just want to, from my own experience as a trustee and also board president, several rounds there, and then working with boards up and down the state here, just this suggestion that making sure from this sort of summarizing what we're talking about here, making sure our meetings are as efficient as possible so we don't have to go back and say, whoopsie, I think I didn't mean to vote on that. And because that does not build confidence. And then, come on, we have teachers who are thinking, yeah, they voted yes, but they could amend it next week. And that's just not, that's not cool. That's not where we want to go. So I agree with Chris, a very tidy meeting. I think it would be good. Yes, sir. I think it would be great to have a staff person who is sort of your designated parliamentary procedure point person. And my last point, and then I turn it back to you, Dr. Freeman, because I saw your hand up. Rely on your staff. You know, you can turn to your staff and say, would you restate the question that's before us? And because they're not as engaged in the conversation with you, they're listening, and rely on your staff for that. Clarification on the question and what we're going to be voting. Also, a very fair question to ask your staff. If we amend this, are there implications for timelines? Are there implications for current action? There, as trustees have said now a couple of times, our votes have implications, so we want to understand what those are. And as an extension of that point, if you're looking at an item in your packet, and we all get it in advance of the meeting, and sometimes just doing our homework can help us get out in front of this as well, right? So if you're looking at an item and you're thinking, this is the question that's going to be before us related to this portion of the budget or facilities or whatever, and you don't think it's right or feels off to you, that's the time to call your superintendent or whoever your point person is there in the district. I would say call the superintendent, and I saw a nod there from Greg, and ask, you know, can I clarify the question that's going to be before us? So there's a lot of a call to action for homework among trustees. And with all due respect, sir, I saw that Trustee Freeman's hand was up there, and he was waiting patiently for me. So I'll turn to you, and then to Jose. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so you point out the critical focus of doing your homework. And Mr. Stafford has mentioned that the superintendent, Mr. Bennett, sits down with him individually. Well, he also sits down with me, and has offered to do that with anybody. It would seem to me that given that we do get plenty of time to review the agenda, and you know, if I have a question on the agenda, when I'm looking at it, I'll call Mr. Bennett and ask him. So I would think that the number of times where somebody would want to change their vote or amend something because of misunderstanding, that should be very, very slim, if at all, that would happen, because there are so many opportunities to fix that misunderstanding. And I just think that well, I don't like amending motions in the first place. I know that that's something that does happen. I have belonged to organizations where we do say that only the person making the motion can amend it. I think having in this particular instance, if we have something in writing, whether it be a board policy or not, that this is what we do for amending motions. I just think in the case of clarity for everybody, that would be helpful.
Very good.
Trustee Arau, and then Trustee Garcia.
Thank you, Trustee Stafford. I just want to clarify that when I made the comment about amending past action items, I was not talking about in general. I was talking about this specific once in a 6-year time, right? It's the first one that we have here. And the rationale is because we were precluded from analyzing, discussing, and voting on the amendment, right? I understand that we cannot be changing decisions from previous meetings, but when the process was not followed, and again, with a goodwill and intentional misunderstanding, that's we are not arguing that anymore, right? We completely understand, but that was something that we didn't have that opportunity to do it. And I'm okay with that, even though it didn't have, and that motion was not going to have a direct effect per se on the budget. It was about something kind of to the side, but it was an important amendment. That is the direction of my question. So just to understand that is not the suggestion at any moment to do that, right? That I just wanted to make it clear. In terms of the comments specifically, and I think we need to answer this question originally from Dr. Freeman. The comments, we have the opportunity to talk to Mr. Bennett, but you mentioned also that, and we know that the board meetings are a public discussion, right? And when you are discussing some items, at that moment, you might have some questions as a result of the discussions. And if it's related to the items that are discussed, are we allowed to make questions during the board comments that are in general? They are not related to one specific action item, but they are related to the situation. I don't know if I'm explaining myself. Or it has to be questions that we ask to cabinet. It has to be privately only. I Is my personal opinion. I disagree with that because if Dr. Freeman has a question, I want to know what is his question because I can say, wow, I didn't think about that question. Now I can have a better understanding. Tony might ask another question to Mr. Bennett, and I didn't have the opportunity to know what that question was, and that can expand my understanding of the issues or bring another questions. So that's why, and I don't have control over that. I personally decide no. If I'm going to ask any questions, I want to ask it in front of everybody so everybody knows. The board members know what are my concerns, and that's my personal opinion, and I have control over that. Other board members, they can be with Mr. Bennett. That's okay. But something that it would be nice is if those questions, for example, are summarized and they are disseminated, those answers, to all the board members without identifying, Tony asked me this, and this is the answer. Ed asked me this, or Dr. Freeman asked this question, because that's the information that I believe all of us should have. That's the second part of my comment. The first one was a clarification, and the second one was about the comments.
Okay, and I'd like to take that one, Chris, but first I saw, with respect, President, I saw Trustee Garcia's hand up. But I'll come back to questions, sir, in a second, because I have a few thoughts for you to, as a team, to discuss.
Okay, Trustee Garcia.
Thank you. I have a few things to say real quick. So the 1 week is kind of difficult for us because the superintendent meets with the president the day before it gets published. So if we meet with the superintendent after, we can't change the agenda because the president has already agreed or disagreed or whatever changes is made at that point. And then Mr. Freeman made a comment about he wants something in writing, who can make an amendment, whatnot. Well, that's what Robert rules are already establishing. I think what he wants is more of to make the rule, the standing rule we talked about, where only the person who accepts a motion can make an amendment. And, you know, we can agree or disagree, whatever. But I think that section is highlighted in Robert's rules. And then I do have a question because it did occur. Can anyone reject an amendment? Because that was happening when we were having discussion. And don't get me wrong, you know, I think we do need to have better understanding of Robert's Rule of Order to be more consistent. But what happened was we kind of started discussion before the second occurred. And then that's where it kind of went south from there. And then eventually it got to the point where the person who made the motion decided, okay, well, I reject the amendment because I guess they were under the impression that they can. And I think that's where we need clarity, you know, because we want to be consistent together. And honestly, for the most part, I think we're a flawless group of trustees and we work amazing together, you know. So I don't know, how do we answer that?
So just to clarify, let's say that you know, board member A makes a motion, it is seconded, debate begins, board member B makes a motion to amend the motion. There's discussion about that, there's a vote, and if the vote is a majority to amend the motion, you have an amended motion, that's what's on the floor. So the original motion disappears, the new amended motion is what's on the floor for discussion and a vote.
Mr. Keeler, do you need a second for that amendment?
If the rule is that you have a motion and a second for all of your actions, yes, it follows the exact same pattern.
Okay. You didn't say anything about a second, so I just want to make sure that we were talking about a second for the amendment.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It requires a second. I mentioned that Robert's rules is meant for large deliberative bodies. There's a section at the very end of Robert's rules that says for smaller bodies, if you need to modify the rules, you can do that. And one of the things they say is you can do away with the requirement of a second, so that all you need is a motion. But unless you have a bylaw that says we don't need a second for anything, every action is going to have a motion and a second. So thank you for pointing that out. I did not mean to imply that you did not need a second.
And I want to come back to the subject of discussions with the superintendent. It's been mentioned that the superintendent is available to walk through the agenda with you, what's on there. Sometimes our questions are, just a little housekeeping ask. Sometimes I'd ask for clarification on the enrollment at this campus or that campus and remind me why we made a priority of this campus, or just sort of a little bit of stuff that was nuanced to my way of thinking, or I just needed a little bit more homework, a little background. But I do think it is a very good to remember that the board should go into a meeting with the same information. We don't necessarily have the same point of view. Also, I think it's important to remember you should not go into a board meeting with your mind made up, because really, as good fiduciaries, you should be listening to each other and collecting all that information. And, there were times that the last speaker who came up to the podium, like I thought, I didn't even consider it. I mean, that guy who's at the head of our maintenance department and his argument, I thought, I didn't even consider that, and it might tweak your thinking. So if superintendent, there are questions coming into you as you're reviewing the agenda items with trustees and you think that's a really good question and that's a substantial piece of information, that is, I think as a practice, good to get that to your board. And to the question of, but I'll leave that with you, sir, because it's not my place to sit here and just make action items for you, but your body language is remaining very friendly. I thank you for that. But to the question of, do you save all your questions for a public meeting so the public hears you doing your job versus speaking with staff up front? I will tell you, I think the healthiest practice I've seen, K-12 through to community college and higher ed, is to have a conversation with staff and gather the information you need. And then in the public meeting say, I was able to gather additional information and I'd like to share. And then you can kind of summarize. Now, the discussion, Trustee Freeman might bring something up, President Stafford, that prompts another question from me, and that's fine. That's where you discuss and deliberate at the dais. But I think letting your staff know I am going to ask these questions of you in public. I thank you for answering them for me, but people have been particularly concerned about mold abatement in the gym, and I'm going to ask my questions so that they're in the record and the public hears your response. It's not performance as much as just making sure you're in the most efficient meeting as possible, which I think is what you're all committed to. So yes, Superintendent. Oh, again, sorry. I owe this board president a piece.
Carolyn wants to be board president of Perris Union High School District. I think that's clear. I'm not good in these meetings. I'm sorry. I'm an in-person.
Second the motion.
I can't hit the button that fast. So it's flowing nicely. Let's keep it.
I just wanted to share. There are quite a few times that Mr. Stafford will give me a call, be asking a question, say he wants, and at the board, and I say, well, I want you to ask that question in front of everybody, but now he's giving me a little bit of time to be able to make sure we have the information that he needs or that we want to share with all the board members. So that's just something that's worked with Tony and I along the way.
Excellent.
That's great. Could I would just chime in because, Dr. Arau did ask or made a general comment about asking questions. The Brown Act does allow it. Even if, for example, someone stands up and talks about mold in the gym and there's nothing on the agenda about it. The board can say to the superintendent, this is a new item. It's not on the agenda, but we'd like you to bring a report on this back to us, something like that. You're allowed to ask questions. You're allowed to ask staff to report back to you, even for matters not on the agenda. I like this practice of people asking questions in advance, and even if you know, but put staff on notice that I may be asking you this question so that the public can hear the answer. I think that's a very healthy practice.
You can say I will be, you know, I'll vote on this item, but I'm going to make particularly clear that I'm not satisfied with our reserves, or I'm going to make, just be forewarned, I'm going to make particularly clear that I feel the negotiations have not been as fair to CSEA as they should have been, or whatever. You can say, tell your staff, I'm going to signal something, but you really don't want to hold up the work of the district to signal that. And so I do also want to not lose, we're running out of time here. I want to make sure all of your questions have been asked and answered. I'm hearing maybe a checklist for motion, second, amended, second, just a quick checklist of that summarizing your discussion would be healthy, and I'm assigning that to Chris. Anyway, woohoo, that felt good. And I didn't see any changes to your governance items and your governance handbook, but I do wanted to ask you, this is another little thing that's coming up in districts up and down the state. There's usually a place on the agenda for board comments or, you know, staff board report. It's pretty wide open, and often boards have to have a pretty frank conversation about whether it's being used well or abused or too political. And I'm not sure whether or not that's something that is on your agenda, and I apologize for not knowing. And is it something that you need to talk about? I bring it up again because it is historically usually an area that's a little sticky. And I'll turn first to the board president. Do you see this as an area that needs discussion, sir?
Well, I think Trustee Freeman had a question there before
Okay.
I was thinking about something else. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, you are addressing a time when a board member is making a comment that for the time that's set on the agenda.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, what can we comment about? Because, or can we use the time of our trustee comment time, when each of us has that, to begin asking questions of the superintendent and various staff members?
Well, I'm going to take a pass at that, Chris, first, and then you can tidy me up because I'm not a lawyer.
Great.
That was 3, no one caught it, so I'm keeping the prize. I mean, somebody was going to win a Tesla. You cannot get into a discussion where you should avoid getting into any kind of back and forth with your colleagues that's looking like now you have an agenda item. So Chris Keeler and I are on the board together, and he brings up something about school uniforms, and I visited a school that had great school uniforms, and I really want to see a report on that. And then in my comments, I say, I agree with him. That's 2. So you have to be very careful. I think the question really is, what is the purpose of that time on the agenda? And for most districts, the healthy purpose is if there's a board member who is appointed to monitor legislation, Trustee Garcia is monitoring legislation for the board, could give a report on what's been going on at the Capitol and at the federal level. Or if he's a regional rep to CSBA, what's going on there. It's also a nice time to celebrate the successes. I had a great opportunity to visit the remote back to school, and I was really pleased to see X, Y, and Z. I'm hearing, you know, but I think what you want to avoid is looking like you're tipping your hand to an agenda item and a position, and that you're lobbying even through body language. Watching colleagues go, yeah. So, and I see your hand up, Trustee Garcia, but before we would do that, I want to make sure Chris doesn't think I've like violated any legal lane lines there, sir.
So, no, I think you gave a very good and practical description of how it should work. I'm going to get a little more legal. This is from Government Code 54954.2. It's also your board bylaw 9323 lays it out, but this is right from the Brown Act. Without taking action is what it is. And first of all, remember, action includes deliberations and anything that would move you towards a collective concurrence on something that's within your subject matter jurisdiction. So it starts out without taking action, board members or district staff members may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed by the public about items not appearing on the agenda. Additionally, on their own initiative or in response to questions posed by the public, a board or staff member may ask a question for clarification, make a brief announcement, or make a brief report on his or her own activities. Furthermore, the board or a board member may provide a reference to staff or other resources for factual information, ask staff to report back to the board at a subsequent meeting concerning any matter, or take action directing staff to place a matter of business on a future agenda. So that is the exception to discussion of things not actually on the agenda. So without having things on the agenda, you can ask a question of staff, or you can briefly respond. But we highly discourage the board from getting into a back and forth with members of the public, or getting into a back and forth with other members of the board, because you don't want to engage in a factual discussion that looks like you're trying to build concurrence towards some decision that you're going to make in the future. So the report should really be a report. What'd you do this month? Or what'd you do since the last meeting? And you're on a committee at the county level. So what'd you do in that committee? Or, celebrate the big victory of, well, in days past when people had sports, right? Or whatever it is. But that's you do have some rights to make some statements beyond, what's expressly on the agenda. You should use discretion in how you do that. Generally avoid things that are going to build consensus towards something you're going to act on later, because that's going to look like you're cheating and trying to push something forward that's not on the agenda. I hope that makes sense.
And one of the most frequently requested items of me when I facilitate governance is if I speak with the board members in advance and I'll ask them, is there something you want to come up? Inevitably, several board members will say, will you help bring definition to brief comments? Because some people are really using this time pretty aggressively and assertively and extensively. And so, just speaking to the purpose of it, and you guys all agreeing on it, that if Trustee Freeman is on a county committee, he's going to tell us what he's hearing and bring his notes from the meeting, and we're going to move on. But I think the key often here in terms of civility and collegial is brevity. Are there comments? I saw some hands go up. Trustee Garcia had his hand up, and others thoughts on this topic, or maybe it's not an issue. Good.
I don't know the order now we were in, but
I think Trustee Garcia was.
Trustee Garcia.
I believe so.
Well, you both actually answered the question that I was already thinking about. But for the most part, you suggested that we shouldn't ask questions. And I get that. I get the whole concept of Robert's Rules of Order. We should follow them. It's not a mandatory, no, we can't. And I get that, and I respect that, because I believe, timeline, well, not timeline, but, we want to respect everybody's time as well. But I guess more related to the question he's asking when it occurred, it was a question that was directed to the superintendent. Now, we know the superintendent knows he could respond later, or he could respond now, and he chose to respond now. And then it became an issue, amongst board members, which is okay. But I think we should at least be aware that the superintendent has the ability to answer those questions right then and there if he so chooses. And I think that's where it kind of got out of hand. But to me, it wasn't out of hand. The superintendent made that decision. He's the head of the household, and he says, fine, I can answer that. It's no big deal. That's just how I took it. But you did answer legally, and the way you answered, I love it both. Great answers. Thank you.
Okay. Questions? Any more comments? I have a couple.
Yeah, I want that prize.
It's more about bylaws, and I think I spoke about this before. And the language in these bylaws, I'm not sure I understand. Say we have a policy that the board recognizes the right to have access to public records. Well, does the board consider itself the public? Or what would be our position on public on records? say if I want to see a file, we're working on just make up a case of anything, something's gone wrong, and we're working on an issue, and we want to see the file. We want to see the whole case. We don't want to see just snippets of it and be told. Can the board insist on seeing these files?
So the Attorney General answered a question very similar to this, and it related to a individual board member wanting to view a personnel file related to a disciplinary matter.
Mhm.
And the board member said, if I'm going to make a decision on this, I need to see the file. And what the Attorney General said was that individual board members cannot demand to see, in this instance, a personnel file. But if the board as a whole voted to have a presentation to them in closed session and reveal pertinent records, then the board could vote to do that. Now, generally speaking, you don't have the time in every case, certainly, to have administration come in and lay out all the documents. Say you're, in litigation with, a contractor over building a gym. It would, it takes an attorney 15 hours to go through the pleadings, right? So, it won't often be practical to do a deep dive on matters, but if there is a need to do a deep dive and see some records, the board as a whole can make the decision to do that. Now, if it's attorney-client privilege and you're viewing it, you absolutely have a duty to maintain attorney-client privilege. If it's a personnel record, you absolutely have a duty to maintain the confidentiality of the personnel information. If it's a student discipline matter, you have, similar responsibility to keep all that student information confidential. So the more information you obtain, the greater the duty that you have to keep that confidential. But in some circumstances, you are the board, and if the board as a whole makes a decision that you want to see something, you can see it. It's just not practical in many.
I need you to, here's the board member saying, all right, but how do you do that? So I'm on this board because David decided he's not running for re-election, and now I'm on the board and I want to see something, but I'm all alone and I can't just call my colleagues and say, hey. So do I tell the board president, I want to report, a full report on this particular disciplinary matter? And would the board president then turn to the superintendent and go from there? I mean, how do I do that without working people and not wanting to violate the Brown Act? What steps would I literally take to say, I want this in front of the full board? And the rest of the board may not agree with me, but what process do I observe, sir?
So the last time this issue came up for me, I was in closed session on a different matter. Okay, so this was not my matter, but I'm with the board, and I have the matter that it's an evaluation issue actually with the superintendent, not this district obviously, but while we're there, the CBO is there to talk about a workers' comp case, and a settlement in a workers' comp case, and how many of those do you handle a year? Lots of them, and you can't do a deep dive on all of them. But this particular one, they had a bunch of unanswered questions, and they said, you're asking us just to approve this. We're not comfortable. So we want you to bring back, a full report, and we want to see, some more information on this. And the CBO said, okay, but that this involves a lot of very confidential information. There's nothing more confidential than someone's own health. So, what can I give you that will satisfy you and help you feel like you can make the decision that you have to make? And they had a good discussion about that. They didn't take action at that time. They didn't, I know the CBO wanted it. The board just wasn't ready for it. And so they were going to have another meeting soon enough. And so the CBO got direction about what additional information was going to be brought back to the board. So it happened in closed session when the CBO expected them to be taking action. But there wasn't an immediate timeline that they were going to blow if they came back and got some more information. So from time to time, that'll happen. And you can make that request. You're all together in the room, so the board can make that request as a whole. It's much more difficult when that idea comes to people outside of a meeting because it's not the board deciding. And an individual can't say, I want to see that personnel file, or I want to see that police report, or whatever it is. So normally it's going to require the board majority making that call. Hopefully you're not going to blow a deadline. I mean, your staff is going to tell you, well, in the future we can give you, more of this type of information you want, but we have a legal deadline. You have to approve it now. I mean, you might get that answer, and it might not be very satisfying, but.
Chris, we're like not in closed session. We're not going to be in closed session on this. I feel very strongly. I'm not making a decision on this without more information. Should I call the superintendent? Should I just try to avoid the daisy chain of board and say, I really feel very strongly about this, and then trust the superintendent to help me process and maybe say, I'll bring it up to what would you do with that?
Well,
As an
for
individual board member?
run-of-the-mill information requests happen all the time. I mean, staff know that board members come to them with questions all the time. And I would imagine that the practice is that when the answer is given, it gets pushed out to each board member so that everyone knows the information that other members are getting. I mean, that is the best practice. And so if, the question is, hey, there's a budget coming up. Is there a cash flow analysis that you've done related to this? Because I don't see it in the packet, and Candace can say, yes, I have that. Why don't I push that out to everyone? You're not asking her to create some new record. I mean, there are kind of run-of-the-mill type things, but if you're talking about a big research project, if you're talking about something that's privileged or confidential or particularly sensitive, those are decisions that we're going to ask the board to make. But there are a lot of, simple information requests that will help you do your job that are not problematic. You run those through the superintendent. The superintendent gets those out to everyone so everyone knows what's going on. I mean, that's very common. If I'm saying something that's not common practice, please correct me, staff, but, there are non-controversial information requests where information can get pushed out in a really fast time. It's the more complicated ones, the personnel questions and the student questions and attorney-client privilege questions that are trickier.
Well, it's just a little frustration sometimes because the information, the board is the last one to know. That's like most jobs. If you're at the top, you're the chief, you're the last one to find out. So in some cases, you want to make sure you have all the information. Sometimes you know the information, but you've chose to, you don't know where to go with it. and that was the question. I'm sorry. What you say, well, you can go to your superintendent, you can, what avenue do you take? And then when you see something blatantly wrong, this is wrong, but it's gotten past to the point where you can do much about it. So you're going to have to break some rule because you're not going to let it happen. So that's what I worry about. I want the information before time. Go ahead, Dr. Rao.
Okay, I just would like to summarize what Ms. Finder's question was and Chris' answer. If a board member has a specific question about something confidential, a personnel matter or file, and how Ms. Finder said, the board member said, I'm not going to make a decision until I see that. So would it be a good practice for the superintendent to say, okay, that is your request. We are going to discuss that on closed session. We are going to vote on that. I'm going to ask the board if the board decides that that is something that they want to do, and I'm going to have it ready. If the board says no, then I'm not going to show it to you in order to expedite the process. Am I understanding that correctly? Because only the board can make those requests. So, but if that item is going to be considered on today's meeting later on, I want to look at it during closed session. So have it ready. If the decision is yes, you are going to share it with us, it's there. If it's not, sorry, you need to make your decision without seeing it. Is that what, can we summarize it that way?
Well, that is a legally correct summary. But oftentimes you hear about things multiple times before you're taking final action. You get little updates along the way. So what I would prefer is if you know you're going to have a question, ask it earlier on in the process, so that we're not getting to the very end where you're going to have to take a vote and you say, I need this now, or it's a kind of an all or nothing, and it's at the time of the final action. You were legally correct in how you described that, but oftentimes there are opportunities earlier on in the process to ask those questions and ask for that information in closed session. And I'd encourage you to think ahead about those things that you have, those questions.
And you're at time, though I don't want to deny you opportunity to talk about anything else. You did discuss a change to your policy from 1 week to 2 weeks for setting agenda. Chris, I believe that was an item that it's 9322. We're going to get you an outline on just a little cheat sheet for lack of better description on opening an item and amending an item and so forth. I think you had a healthy discussion about the use of comments, board comments, and the key is really brevity and adding something of purpose. And the other thing you guys are going to keep an eye on, but I mean, we're not going to do this tonight, is just as these meetings are remote and folks are, I don't think you've had a lot of trouble with people bombing your meetings, but there have been districts where really hundreds of people, not even from the community, like with an opinion calling in from Iowa, are bombing meetings. And so you're going to really keep an eye, President and Superintendent, on how you take comments and questions, and hope it does not happen to you. It's only happened to me now a few times in different districts, but as I think we get closer to the November election, we're probably going to see some activity start up where we haven't seen it. So just keep an eye on that. And if you ever want to just process how you're taking the questions or how you're reading comments into the agenda, how you hold to time, let us know. We're happy to process it with you. My best advice, and I wasn't asked for any, and unsolicited advice isn't really very welcome, but my best advice is if you have a sort of a procedure on this, and you have 3 minutes per speaker and 20 minutes to a topic, stick to it. The law of exception in this area can get really sticky, especially when people can join you remotely and from anywhere. So you're a terrific team. You're really very collegial with one another, and I think very well intentioned, and the kids are awful lucky to have you. I'm sorry our world is remote right now. It's awful sad. It's taken away the thing we love most. So I feel, maybe it's just because I'm married to a teacher and my sister's a teacher. I don't know who I feel more sorry for, the kids or the teachers. It's pretty tough out there, but thank you so much for what you do and hanging in there with our kiddos. We appreciate it. And do you have anything you want to add as a close, President, on behalf of the board, or any last minute things you want to throw at us?
I'll just throw the last little thing, only because it's a current item in our bylaws about closed session record keeping. I believe it's, well, it's way down here in the pile, but closed session and reports, and it included an actual form to be filled out after what was discussed in closed session and what was in closed session. I just want us to take a close look at that, each of us, to know if we want that one to be passed or not. I don't have any strong opinion either way, but I just want to make sure you're all aware of that one. Because if we adopt that, that's something that we should be doing, or we're committed to do. And everybody take a look at that. So that's all I have. Thank you so much for listening to our issues, and we do get along great, and it's a great team. So
Yeah.
It's only going to get better the more we communicate. So
yeah, well, it's an interesting thing. When I was in governance training, I'll never forget this. When we were asked as new board members, what is the funkiest part of our world, and there were a bunch of responses about, like, we've never dealt with a union before, or getting our budget from the state, or financial woes. But I'll never forget, it was in that moment I thought, what's the most unusual and I've never dealt with before is the Brown Act. Just this note, and it's wonderful that we keep the public's work before the public. It's true and just, and it's the truth of our democracy. whether you've seen Hamilton or not. It's the truth of what we're born to protect and promote. But it can make it very challenging for us, and so applause to you. I failed to mention one other item that came out of here, and this is eye contact on Candace. I'm not sure who's going to own this, but there was agreement that there'd be sort of a parliamentary point person for the board in meetings, and that this board, please, will rely on them, each of you, to turn and say, I'm not even clear on what the question is before us, and if we've observed our own protocol here, will you help us? And your staff will. They'll help you really move it along really efficiently. And so I wish you all great luck, and I hope you enjoy virtual football. And anyway, thank you very much, and we're here to help you with any follow-up if you need it.
Okay.
Carolyn and Chris, I want to thank you for coming out and
Thank you.
working with us tonight. You guys did a great job, and
Sure.
really appreciate your time.
Chris,
Sure.
thank
Our
you.
pleasure.
Our pleasure. I'm
So,
going to sign off.
Yeah,
okay.
I'll sign off.
I'll sign off, sir. Thank
Thank
you.
I'll help
Take
you
care.
see-
Thank you very much.
So, Grant, we have a little bit of time. Do you want to take a break?
Well, you have to adjourn this meeting, the special meeting first.
Yeah, I see that here. But just to see what we're going to do, because I could use a quick break.
Yeah, we could take 5 after we adjourn the meeting and then come back.
Okay. So item 6.1 is adjournment. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
That was Dr.
Dr. Rao and Mr. Garcia.
Okay, second is Dr.
I'll second.
Good.
Takes on a new meaning, doesn't it? And Trustee Garcia. Okay, so we'll do a quick roll call and then we'll go to the electronic vote. Hopefully everybody's signed in, joined the meeting. Start with Trustee Rao,
Aye.
Trustee Garcia,
Aye.
Trustee Freeman,
Aye.
Trustee Nellison,
Aye.
and myself, Trustee Stafford, aye. Upon calling a vote being taken, the vote was 5 in favor, 0 against. Please vote electronically. Let me get back to board IC. I don't have anything up here.
Me neither.
Anna, we were just doing electronic, just verbal vote on this, weren't we?
Oh, we don't need electronic on this one?
Anna?
Yeah, there. Well, we have the oral, if that's all.
We only have to do it. We don't have to do it. We don't have to
Well,
do
for me, it hasn't even gone off 5.1. It's still on 5.1 study session.
I think Anna's away taking care of something for the next meeting, but if I can chime in, I think if you just do the oral vote, Anna can fix it on an electronic school board while you're in closed session or taking your break.
We already did the oral vote.
Okay, so we're adjourned at 3:44 p.m.